Welcome to the Adams County Historical Society. As you probably know, I'm Tim Smith, the historian here, and we're pleased today to welcome Ken Gavin, doing a Revolutionary War program for you. So let me tell you a little bit about Kenneth Gavin. Is a seasoned professional with nearly 25 years of experience in the field of history, public relations, and senior management in the nonprofit sector. The story of the American Revolution and the people who lived through that time period have been close to his heart from an early age. Some of his earliest memories involve spending time at historic sites like Valley Forge and Gettysburg with his parents, I think like many of us. He has worked as a part-time at Valley Forge National Historic Park for 18 years, providing hundreds of tours for thousands of visitors. Those highly acclaimed programs explore the complex military, political, and economic and social elements of that famous winter encampment in a broader context of the Revolutionary War struggle. He also served as a key consultant and actor for Valley Forge's recently launched orientation film, Determined to Persevere, which is very good. Ken previously served as a guide at the Gettysburg National Military Park and in Old City, Philadelphia, in conjunction with teaching American history grant programs sponsored by the United States Department of Education. Ken also possesses over 2 decades of substantial experience with living history programs relative to the American Revolution and also the American Civil War. He has planned, staged, executed, and commanded such events at local and national level while working in a variety of local, state, and federal agencies. He currently serves as commander of the recreated Spencer Additional Regiment of the Continental Line. A strong believer in historical education and preservation, Ken has served on the boards of several museums, historic sites, and other nonprofit entities, including the Grand Army of the Republic Museum and Library, the Princeton Battlefield Society, the Continental Line, Colonel Ogden's 1st New Jersey Regiment, and Spencer's Additional Continental Regiment. He's also an independent consultant advising historic sites regarding interpretation, programming, site management, public relation, and crisis navigation. Currently, he is retained as a consultant for the public history programming relative to our nation's semi-quincentennial celebration by the State of New Jersey Department and the Environmental Protection, Division of Parks and Forestry, as well as the Washington Crossing Historic Site in Pennsylvania. Ken has also been a preferred model and central figure for the works of noted historical artists Don Triani and Jeff Trexler. Recently, he has been a frequent guest on Addressing Gettysburg podcast, which a lot of us listen to, and is advising Adams County Historical Society regarding the upcoming semi-quincentennial programming. As you know, that's 250. It's good. I still have issues saying that. Semi-quincentennial. He is employed full-time as a Chief Communications Officer of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Let's welcome Ken Gavin.
Tim, thanks very much for the introduction. You guys are really gracious. I have done absolutely nothing and you're already clapping, so I guess that's a really good start to things today. It's really good to be here. Thanks for spending some time on your Saturday morning with me as we talk a little bit about Gettysburg and the American Revolution. And I'm going to say Gettys, not just because that's a Tim Smith thing that Tim's been pushing for, but interestingly, in looking at some research for this program and some other stuff I've done on this topic, James Gettys, who is central to the founding of this town, when he is listed in Revolutionary War rolls, there are times when his name is spelled Geddes, So, yes. So if you needed any further evidence besides Tim's good word that you should be saying Gettysburg, there it is in documentation for you with nothing to do with either one of us. So while I might slip into Gettysburg, as we all do from time to time, I think there's really strong evidence from that very founding period and the pronunciation of that name that we can go with Gettys. So anyway, good to be here. We've got until about 10:15 this morning, so I'm going to do my best to work through this content as best that we can in that time period. Knowing that many of you are going on Tim's bus tour, if anybody is not going on the bus tour, then you want to have some chats with me, questions, things when we're done, that's absolutely fine. But our goal today is going to be to take a look at Gettysburg within the context of the American Revolution, connections to it, philosophically, what's going on here during that period in time. And I'm big on fundamentals, so I actually want to start with a little bit of philosophical grounding on how I want to approach the presentation today. And I want to start with Carl Becker, who's an historian working in the first half of the 20th century, rather. And Becker is in this quote, once upon a time, a long, long time ago, he's talking about he learned how to reduce a fraction to its lowest terms. Then he wants to do that with the operation of history. What Becker is talking about when he's examining historical events in that fashion is not that he's trying to simplify it to the point that we're losing context, losing nuance, losing meaning. He doesn't want to lose any of that. When he simplifies it down, he looks at historical events and says, there are two ways to look at them. One is the ephemeral historical event. The ephemeral historical event is grounded in absolute fact. Any historical event happens one way, in one place, at one time. But when historians begin to examine them, they create something called an affirmed event. An affirmed event is something that can change over time. It can be molded, it can be shaped, and people will take historical events and change the interpretation to fit a social, political, or economic need or goal that they have, all right? That's an important thing to sort of keep in mind as we move into the first portion of the presentation. The second thing that I want you to remember as we go through stuff today is a heck of a lot simpler than Carl Becker. What is history about? It's always about the people. When we study things, particularly military history, it's easy to fall into the old trap of looking at troop movements on a map. You have blocks that are red and blue or whatever color to denote them, you know, where we hear interesting stories of people from the past. But never forget that they're people just like us, with hopes, with dreams, with fears, with strengths, with weaknesses. And by and large, for me, the study of history is about how individuals react to challenges within the context of their life, within the context of their local societies, within the context of their broader communities. How they answer those challenges, how they respond to those questions, that is what shapes our national heritage. So for me, history is always about the people. All right, so kicking this off to where I want to go. Obviously, this is not the American Revolution, and this is clearly not the American Civil War. So no, I did not lose my mind. I did not make an error with the slides. I have this famous picture up here from D-Day to make a point. This is labeled Into the Jaws of Death, and this is the Big Red One. This is the 1st Infantry Division going in on D-Day. How many people in this room remember World War II veterans, interacted with them in their lives? Like 90% of you, all right? Good, and that's exactly the point I wanted to make. We just passed the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Coming up this summer, we're going to hit the 80th anniversary of the end of that conflict. So we have interacted with those folks. They were part of our lives. There are veterans of that conflict who are still living. The gap, time-wise, is really short. When you look at the gap that we experience between the present day and World War II, that is the same gap that the Civil War era experiences between it and the American Revolution. There is only 78 years from the end of the American Revolution to the beginning of the American Civil War. So that means for people alive in the 1850s and in the 1860s, Revolutionary War veterans are part of the fabric of their communities, part of the fabric of their societies. There is a living memory of that conflict present. It is front and center as we move towards tearing ourselves apart as a nation. So just as much as you remember World War II and are influenced by World War II, that's happening within the context of the Civil War when they look back towards the American Revolution. So thinking about my philosophical approach, thinking about that context, how does the American Revolutionary War period become adopted by both sides moving into the American Civil War, right? From a political context, they have to do that. Both sides have to claim, North and South, Confederate Union, however you want to phrase that, have a compulsion to say that they are the legitimate heirs to the revolutionary torch, that they are the true defenders of it. Anybody know who this guy is? All right, Senator Robert Toombs from Georgia. All right, quick quote from Robert Toombs that I'll give you is he's looking at secession, and he's pushing towards secession. And I know Toombs is from Georgia, and that's South Carolina iconography behind him, but South Carolina is first to secede. Here's what Robert Toombs has to say. In 1860, as South Carolina is eventually moving towards secession, the arguments of tyranny as well as its acts always reenact themselves. The arguments I now hear in favor of Northern connections are identical in substance and almost in the same words as those which were used in 1775 and 1776 to sustain the British connection. So there, in a movement towards secession, Toombs is making a clear correlation that the North, that the Lincolnites are no different than the British Crown in 1776. So after secession happens, we're moving into warfare in spring of 1861. Sumter hasn't happened yet when the inaugural addresses are being delivered, but what are Lincoln and Davis both going to say in those inaugural addresses? What they're going to do is they're going to make callbacks to the Revolutionary period immediately. These guys know military conflict is on the horizon, that secession has been a major crisis issue for the country. So what's Lincoln going to do in a big chunk of his first inaugural address? He's going to go back as a lawyer and make a legalistic argument that the Union has to be preserved. And he's going to take you down a laundry list of why that's going to happen. Articles of Association in 1774, that everyone feels good about Union because of that. By 1778, the Articles of Confederation will more closely bind the colonies/states. And then in 1787, Lincoln says the whole purpose of the Constitution is that we liked Union. And we wanted to form a more perfect one. So there he goes, immediate callbacks to the founding period in the face of national crisis in early 1861. What's Davis going to do? The same thing, just to make his own case. He's saying that the people of 1776 asserted a right that they had, and that the Confederacy is doing nothing different. And Davis is going to take it a step further, and the Confederates really like to do this. He's just going to pull in God, because why not at that point in time, on top of the Founding Fathers. And he's going to say that, God's going to be the judge. He'll be the one to give the verdict, but the Confederacy, we're the true torchbearers. Why are they doing this, right? Why is there a compulsion for them to look back to that time period? Because they have to motivate a population with warfare on the horizon. Who's right? Who's wrong? The people who are right are the ones who are the true torchbearers of the Revolutionary period. Anybody know what that is? And I've kind of blurred out a center portion of this whole thing here. We'll do a little bit of visual archaeology. It's the Great Seal of the Confederate States of America. Around it, in a ring, you're going to see the cash crops of the South. You're going to see things like rice. You're going to see corn, cotton, tobacco, sugarcane. Look down here at the bottom, the words that are not English. Deo vindice. Right. God will vindicate, God will preserve, God will defend. It can be translated several different ways. Thomas Semmes, who is a Confederate senator, when they're designing the Great Seal of the Confederacy, explicitly says the Yankees forgot to bring God into it on their side when they formed the Constitution, making them morally corrupt. So from the very beginning, we're going to bring God into this. And they're going to say, God is on our side. And who do they put at the center of this? I'll take out the blur for you now. Right, George Washington's right at the center. Right? George is saying hello. They actually take that from the statue of Washington that's in Richmond. the one that's put up in the 1850s. But through this iconography, I mean, this symbolism is meaningful. They're saying Washington is at the heart of this cause. We are the ones who are closely connected to the founding period, not the northern states. All right. So some fun stuff that I want to roll through here, and I put some mastheads up from 19th century newspapers. If you think about how we communicate today and the way that you absorb information, your phones are probably front and center at much of that, or your tablets, that sort of thing, right? Physical newspapers are a bit in decline at this point in time. But what do you get besides news? What are the things that you see on Facebook, on other social media platforms, where you get a little information sometimes and they also make you chuckle? GIFs, memes, those short videos. So a lot of times they're politically charged. They talk about societal issues, right? You see what I'm talking about? In the 19th century, newspapers are going to produce the GIFs or the memes or those short little, they don't have videos, of course, at that point in time, but it's those little snippets that can be informative, it's political commentary, and it can make you laugh. And I want to roll through some of them here a little bit to prove that point, and it's also going to show how in the early 1860s, they're making all of these callbacks to the Revolutionary period. All right, this is 1861 from the Charleston Courier. I'm not going to read the entire thing to you here, but it's a little snippet that says, "Hail to the chief," and they're talking about Jefferson Davis being inaugurated as president of the Confederacy. They say, "Never has the unanimous preference of a large and varied constituency pointed with more emphasis to any person, and never has a chief or president thus honored by unanimous preference been more worthy in his previous record than in this memorable instance." They refer to Jefferson Davis as the George Washington, that's a quote, the George Washington of the Confederate States of America, and the worthy successor in the field or the cabinet of the George Washington of the United States. Yeah, it doesn't add to the pressure at all. I can imagine Washington kind of turning in his grave at that too. So an interesting one here. Rebels and traitors, the common epithet bestowed by the Lincoln Press upon the people of the seceded states. The same that was applied by the British and Tories in the Revolution to our ancestors, even George Washington being styled as a rebel leader. It took the rebels some time to teach the Tories good manners, but they succeeded at last, nor do we despair altogether of improving the Republican mode of speech, and that at no distant day. George III never perpetrated a thousandth part of wrongs against the colonies which Lincoln meditates against the southern states. And there is no difference between the two tyrants, except that the one was a gentleman and the other is a blackguard. Yeah, right. So clearly we've got a southern source newspaper here, but again, that direct correlation we're going to make to the Revolutionary period. Okay. Now, and this one's from the Adams Sentinel on October 30th of 1861. Profiteering is not a new thing, right? You think about election period, just went through a presidential election. People made tons of money selling hats, T-shirts, bumper stickers for both candidates that went through that whole thing. This guy's a real huckster, though. They're talking about a guy from New York City in October 30th of 1861, early in the war. Everybody wants to be patriotic. Hey, you want to get a fine woodcut engraving of George Washington? You want to get a fine woodcut engraving of Benjamin Franklin? Just send $1 to this guy, and he's going to send you these finely cut heads. You know what people got in the mail? Those stamps. So he made out well. He was getting 95 cents on every dollar you sent him, and those were his woodcut engravings that were there too. This one was a reprint in the Adams Sentinel in August of 1862. And see, these are great. They're just little fun snippets. It's the GIF or the meme of the day. And I'll read it just in case you can't see it. This is a short one. The following is reported as a fact. A Louisville Union lady a few days ago called on a secesh friend and felt obliged to listen to her tirade. On rising to leave, she noticed and praised a portrait of General Washington, whereupon the she-rebel remarked, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I intend to get fine portraits of Jeff Davis and Beauregard and hang up one on each side of that." "Do," said the Union lady. "We read in the Bible that our Savior was hung between two thieves." And in honor of that Union lady, there you go. So you see a little sort of lead up context to the conflict. Now moving into the conflict itself, they're still doing the same thing in these reports. Richmond Times-Dispatch, and a little blurry, so I'll read this to you as well, and it's a short one. This involves General Leonidas Polk on the other side. In 1861, Polk is fighting against Ulysses S. Grant along the Mississippi River, where Columbus, Kentucky is on one side of the river, and Belmont, Missouri is on the other side of that. All right, and that's important not just because of dominance over the river, but the Mobile and Ohio Railroad is also there. And eventually, Union forces will be successful in 1862, but the 1861 campaign against Belmont did not go well for Ulysses S. Grant. And there are a number of prisoners that are taken as part of that campaign. And this little snippet is about a prisoner exchange that's happening between Union and Confederate forces in 1861. A happy reply from the Memphis Appeal. An incident is related as having occurred between the officials engaged in the exchange of prisoners at Columbus. After the preliminaries were arranged, a repast was partaken, during which one of the federal officers rising proposed the memory of George Washington. The company instantly rose when General Polk, old Leo over there, the memory of George Washington, the first rebel. The toast, our informant says, was drank in ominous silence by the federal officers who were present. The story is too good not to be true or to be lost. Anybody know this guy? Real bonus points if you know him. This is John Augustine Washington III. This is the group. Yes, the last private owner of Mount Vernon. All right, he'll inherit Mount Vernon when it's in a dilapidated state and the economics there are not very good. He'll sell it to the Mount Vernon Ladies Association in the late 1850s for $200,000. John Augustine Washington, early in the war, will go on to enlist in the Confederate service. He becomes a lieutenant colonel. He's an aide to Robert E. Lee. He is killed at Cheat Mountain early in the war. Okay? But this guy's, the point of me telling you these things, he's a household name before the war. He's well known for what he's doing. Remember, Washington's remains are interred at Mount Vernon. All right, that's become sort of a de facto tourist spot in the 1850s. One of the things that really ticked John Augustine Washington off as he's trying to manage a plantation is he's got tourists coming to him all the time. Where's Washington buried? What happened? What did he do? Can you show me around the house? It drives the guy nuts. It's part of the reason why he sells the place. All right? The rumor that John Washington has carried off the remains of Washington is doubted. This was a rumor at the time, early on in the war, that they had scurried away the bones and they'd taken them somewhere. But this was just fun. Indeed, the disappearance may be accounted for on the natural supposition that when Virginia seceded, the bones of George Washington not only moved in their coffin, but got up and went to the free states. Your ancestors had a sense of humor, folks. They even look at what's happening in sites that are relative to the Revolutionary War period, look at things that are going on there, and they say, oh my gosh, this could be a bad omen for us. This story is printed all over the place. Initially, the Reading Gazette. This printing is taken out of the York Gazette in April of 1861. Bad omen. We are informed that the monument at Valley Forge, which has for many years commemorated the heroic martyrdom of the men of the Revolution who perished there during the winter of '77, was blown down on or about the 4th of this month, the day of Lincoln's inauguration. A gloomy omen for the future of the country for which the heroes of Valley Forge fought. So that monument they're talking about is actually an observation tower that was built in the 1840s. It was about 40 feet tall, it was octagonal, it was made of wood, and it blows down in March of '61. But then you get this sort of, oh my God, bad things are coming because of that. Eventually, and here's a little Gettysburg connection for you folks, that tower is going to be replaced with this. Does that look familiar to anybody? You've probably seen ones that look like this out here. That's because Emmer Cope designed this. This was at Valley Forge. This was installed in 1906. The same folks who did the work on the metal observation towers at Gettysburg also did the one at Valley Forge. That was put on the same spot at the top of Mount Joy where the original observation tower stood. It was torn down in the mid-1980s because it was becoming hazardous. The Park Service didn't want to maintain it anymore. However, if you are really into that kind of thing and you want to go see it, it still exists. It was bought by somebody privately, and now that's in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, at Pennsylvania's Grand Canyon. So I believe you can still pay $5 and go up it if you want to. Or you could just drive over to West Confederate Avenue and go up the Longstreet Tower and get the same thrill and look at a different kind of thing. All right? I'm not going to read through all these. These are really lengthy. But these are two accounts of 4th of July celebrations in this area in 1861 and 1862. Both of these are taken from the Adams Sentinel. And in the 1861 4th of July celebration, what they're focusing and honing in on, that this is not just a party at that point in time, that a central part of this whole celebration is that people are going to take an oath that they're going to uphold the values of the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. So that's the 1861 celebration. The 1862 celebration, it becomes a lot darker at that point in time. As they see the war progressing, they discuss things like great clouds and storms that have come over the nation itself, but that treason will be sent packing. But they're referencing in both of these articles and both of these celebrations, the Declaration of Independence is there prominently in both of them, and also going back to the Fathers of 76. So again, making the social connections, making the political connections, that everything that's happening during the period of the conflict of the American Civil War has a correlation and a callback to that revolutionary time period. Okay, I think we've made the point of all that sort of thing. I want to move back. I want to move into some more Gettysburg-specific stuff at the moment, and I want to start with what makes this an attractive area for settlement. And just bear with me as I disappear and flip to my notes, because I want to try to keep myself on track and make sure that I don't forget to say anything. This great little picture of Rock Creek was taken by Melissa Wynn. So the Monocacy watershed is what I want to talk about a little bit here. What makes this an attractive area for settlement in the 18th century is the fact that you reside within the Monocacy River's watershed. You have a number of different creeks and tributaries that flow through here in this area. Tom's Creek, Flat Run, Benner's Run, Rock Creek, all those little bodies of water around here that you can think of, that's all being fed or feeding the Monocacy River watershed. Why is that water going to be important for settlement? Well, it's going to be essential, right? It's going to be essential for drinking. It's going to be essential for planting crops. It's going to be essential for draft animals in terms of farming as well. And it provides a lot. When you think about the Battle of Gettysburg itself, with 165,000 men, thousands of horses and mules, you've got cattle and sheep that Lee is trying to bring back over the mountains and take to Virginia, plus the water you're going to need to sponge artillery pieces on a regular basis. There are some conservative estimates that during that 3-day period alone, somewhere between 3.5 and 3.8 million gallons of water are consumed for all those needs, right? But this place can provide that. So the Monocacy watershed is going to make this very attractive for early settlers who are going to come here. How are they getting here? What is travel and transport like in this area in the 18th century? The Great Wagon Road, as we call it, is going to be critical to settlement moving west from Philadelphia into south central Pennsylvania and other places. The Great Wagon Road, when it is completed, is going to consist of about 800 miles of passageway. It starts in Philadelphia. It moves west through the cities of Chester, Lancaster, York. It moves right through this crossroads town where Samuel Gettys's Tavern is. It curves south into Virginia and then has a spur that shoots off into what become Kentucky and Tennessee down through the mountains, but it takes people all the way down to Augusta, Georgia. And this is how people are going to migrate westward in the 18th century. Hang on a sec. I'll take you to a little bit of an inset on this that will show you road networks that are specific to what will become Adams County, but they'll develop pretty early, all right, as you'll see in a second. So, and this map looks familiar. Totally stole that from downstairs, so you can go take a look at that too, all right. So I've got Gettys Tavern and the crossroads there, but let's take a look at how roads pop up, all right. The inset off to the right, where we've got James Gettys, right, I put him over there right at the crossroads, right where Samuel Gettys' tavern is going to be. But if you can take a look at these various road networks, you can see that this is happening pretty early out here. This is the frontier, but it's frontier-ish. All right, this is not a deserted area at this point in time. You can see as early as 1740, the Marsh Creek Road is going to run through there. 1747, Black Gap Road, Nichols Gap Road is 1748. I don't have that on there. But Manallen Road in 1750, the Carlisle Road in 1770, Monocacy Road 1750, Baltimore Shippensburg Road 1769. All of these are offshoot feeders of the Great Wagon Road. That means that this is an area that is being traveled pretty frequently with these kinds of road networks. And interestingly, by the time you get to about 1770, I think between 1772 and 1775, because this is still York County at that point in time, there are at least 5 petitions for additional roads leading south from this area to Baltimore. That's coming mostly from millers or producers of wheat, which makes a lot of sense because if you're involved in the cultivation of wheat or if you're a miller making flour, you have a ton of product. Where do you want it to go? How do you get it out of here, right? You need a port. You need a port city. So Baltimore is going to be your logical port city that you're going to want to connect with. Philadelphia is really far away. It's going to take you a couple weeks to get out there. You got to cross the Susquehanna River. That's not a great proposition. So you want to get to Baltimore. You know, there's a reason that a lot of people from here who are into sports are Ravens and Orioles fans. It's because you've had an economic, social, and political connection with Baltimore for centuries. A much stronger connection than you've had with Philadelphia. I know there's Pittsburgh fans out here too, but we eventually get further west. Well, I'm from the Philadelphia region, so you may not talk about me after I leave today. I don't know. So, you know, I like the Eagles, and we finally had a good year. Sorry, Ralph, your Giants bit it. Yeah. So early with that sort of thing. Now, what does this road network mean besides commerce? What are the types of things that are happening here in the 18th century? There's a couple of different things that are going to be going on and people that are going to be moving through here. In 1781, as the Continental Army is preparing to go down to Virginia, what will eventually become the Yorktown Campaign, and the recognized end of major land fighting in North America during the Revolutionary War, Anthony Wayne almost gets here. What he's going to end up doing is getting to Littlestown and then moving south after that. So yeah, that's what his road network is going to be. He's going to go to Littlestown. He's going to come down south from there. However, there are Army troops that are moving through here during the Revolutionary War. Specifically, and this is at various points in time. Think about major conflict during the American Revolution, battles around Saratoga, which are a huge defeat for the British Army under General John Burgoyne. It's the first time in its history that the British Army surrenders an army in the field. And Burgoyne has what's called the Convention Army at the end of that. He puts together a treaty with Continental forces. Continental forces are hopeful that all of those troops Burgoyne surrendered will never fight again in North America, which is an absolute just not going to happen. You know, the Continental Congress is under delusion that Parliament will receive this agreement for the Convention Army that these guys can never fight in North America again. And Parliament just sits on it and does nothing because they're never going to agree to that. But what it does is it leaves thousands of human beings who are in limbo with the British Army here in North America. A large chunk of those guys who are in limbo are Germanic auxiliary troops who come from Braunschweig. All right? No, they're not. I'll take a quick side street with you here. They're not all Hessians, but I'm glad you brought it up. All right? The Germanic auxiliaries that fight in North America, roughly 30 to 35,000 of them during the course of the war, are hired to be serving here and to fight against the Continentals. They are not hired as individual mercenaries. Contracts are struck between the British Crown and 6 different Germanic states. Remember, Germany's not going to be unified until von Bismarck in the early 1870s. So while the largest proportion of those troops will come from the Germanic principalities of Hesse-Kassel and Hesse-Hanau, there are also troops coming from Braunschweig, from Anhalt-Zerbst, from Waldeck, all right? All these other places. And Waldeckers and guys from Anhalt-Zerbst, they are not Hessians, and they don't want to be Hessians, all right? We simplify it. However, these Germanic prisoners of war who are being marched to various prison camps, they're usually sending them into South Central Pennsylvania or Winchester, Virginia. To get to Winchester, Virginia, you have to take the Great Wagon Road. Because of that wagon road we talked about, this road network here, specifically the Black's Gap Road and the Nichols Gap Road, which will connect down to Winchester by 1754. You have a gateway to Winchester by 1754 here. And you think about how important Winchester is as the back door. When this place gets invaded in 1863, that thing is in existence over 100 years before the Battle of Gettysburg. Yes, ma'am.
Where is the Monocacy Road relative to this particular? I mean, I'm sorry, the Great Wagon Trail.
So the Great Wagon Road is going to run the Marsh Creek Road and Black's Gap Road. It is not always one consistent trail that runs an entire trek. Both of those are eventually going to take you out into the mountain passes here. So, but as it's coming in towards what is Gettysburg today, that yellow line for the Marsh Creek Road is the inlet for the Wagon Creek Road. Because like today, the roads will take on different names as you move into different locations and places. All right? So, but those Germanic prisoners of war, those Teutonic guys, they're coming right through here on their way to Winchester and going south. And then that means, as you have road networks, you have town settlements. So I won't read off of that. You can look at this and you can see, and there's our handy James Geddes icon telling you exactly where you are again. But you can see that the 1760s, you're getting, and look how it moves, east to west. Right? For the most part, chronologically, as we start to develop towns out here. So my point with this is a pretty developed area. This is a pretty developed place. If anybody, the days of Mary Jemison and the frontier are disappearing by the 1760s and early 1770s. Who are the people that are out here at that point in time, right? Done this little word cloud to kind of give you an idea of the professions. So millers, tailors, farmers, innkeepers, weavers, gunsmiths, hatters, coopers, potters, masons, farmers, wheelwrights, cordwainers, merchants, saddlers, turners, carpenters. It's a lot of different professions. The majority are in farming. But you have all of these supportive types of professions as well. And what that tells me is that this is not necessarily a backwoods farming community. This is an area that's on the rise because you have all these other folks here. What are they doing? They're supporting community. You're building the things that you need to have society, and you're doing it locally at that point in time. That's in terms of professions. But who are these people at a deeper level? Most of them are Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, or they're German-speaking. And they've come here for a couple of reasons. Migratory paths. They have lived in Europe, and they're trying to escape it. Some of the early Germanic settlers are looking to establish profit lines. Most of the Germanic settlers, though, are looking to escape rank poverty. There's a reason that German princes were hiring out their armies in the 18th century left and right for military conflicts, and that's because the states were broke. Because you had a percentage of individuals who were extremely wealthy in the aristocracy, and you had most people living in abject poverty with no way to escape it. You have Scots-Irish Presbyterians who are coming from Ireland, who are coming from Scotland, and they're being severely oppressed by the British. They're living in a state of serfdom. If they're able to get out and to come here, there's opportunity because there is a short social ladder here. Mind you, it's very shaky, but it's also short. So there's opportunity for these individuals to grow in many ways when they come to the New World. Most of the folks who are coming out west into this area are falling into that category of the Scots-Irish and the Germans. The fact that they have experienced severe economic hardship and severe oppression, means that they're not going to be willing to put up with a lot of tyrannical crap when the revolution rolls around either. So you got to keep that in mind. The psyche of these people, the life experience of these people, goes a long way towards the decisions they're going to make when they face challenges. And when I say to you it's always about the people, that's what I mean. You got to take that type of stuff into account. It's just not 1775, what is James Geddes going to do? What decision is he going to make because, the revolution's here? It's like, no, what decision is James Geddes going to make because of his life experience? Or what decision is another person out here going to make because of their past life experience? Just like your experience shapes you, shapes your decisions. The one thing that I didn't talk about, because it's not a profession for which you're paid, is the presence of slavery. And slavery is present in this area in the 18th century. Pennsylvania is a state where a colony / state eventually where slavery is legal. The amount of slaves in Pennsylvania are much less than in other places, to be certain, but it still exists, and it's central to the founding period of Gettysburg. The Geddes family owns slaves. Famously, Sidney O'Brien is one of them. We don't know a whole lot about what she did, but certainly she contributed to the household. Certainly she probably worked at the Globe Tavern. And when Pennsylvania's Act for gradual abolition of slavery takes effect in 1780, Sidney O'Brien will be affected by that. She was born in the late 18th century, and she is born after the act is put into place, which means that at age 28, she will be given her freedom. I'm just going to do this quickly on Pennsylvania's Gradual Abolition Act. It is really gradual. In 1780, the state of Pennsylvania takes a look at slavery within the state at that point in time, and they actually make an interesting correlation towards the revolutionary effort. And they say, this doesn't jive. And I'm going to put this on the drumhead for you guys. This is not a quote because that's not in a 1780 document, right? They say this doesn't really jive with what we're saying here. If we're going to pursue freedom, we don't think we can have slavery anymore. So they put together a plan that they think will be palatable for slave owners in the state, by which anybody who's a slave before the time the act takes effect, out of luck. All right? You're going to, once this is passed, by age 28, you can be freed. And then you're to be given the same tools that an indentured servant would get. So Sidney O'Brien falls into a category where she's going to be freed by age 28. She will eventually buy a house on South Washington Street, and she will live there for the remainder of her life. This is such a gradual kind of thing that it's almost 1860 by the time the last slave dies in Pennsylvania. If you think about the Emancipation Act in 1863, there is a gradual nature to that too, because Lincoln puts a lot of caveats on what slaves are free, what slaves are not free. All right? Because, if the Union Army had already moved in and taken over, you're kind of out of luck with that Emancipation Act. But 1859 is the date of Patience Hack's obituary over there. So I think it's important to acknowledge that this is present. This is part of the economy. This is part of the way of life here in Adams County. And for individuals who are going to be freed by this act of 1780, it's going to take about 70 years before slavery is absolutely abolished in Pennsylvania. Just briefly here to show you how population differentials sort of change over time here. And I've taken a look at these specific counties to do that. So you can see the difference between 1775 and 1860. And I picked that year because, that's a census year. So 1861 is probably just about the same way. But you can see the explosion here in population. But if you want to think in terms of how big is this world, how big is this society, when you look at the 1770s as opposed to looking at the Civil War time period, there's a good graphic indicator for you right there. York County in 1775 has only 5,000 people total, whereas if you look at the time of the battle in 1863, there's roughly 2,400 souls living here. And look at that. There's my next little slide, and this is just some informational stuff that I think is kind of fun. If you move into 1860, of course, Adams County has been erected for 60 years at that point in time. But if you just take a look at Gettysburg in comparison to population there. You'll see we're about 12% here in 1860. But Adams County, so what, roughly 26,000 in 1860. All of York County back then, when it's part of it, only has 5,000 itself. And then your population demographics in 1860, just for a bit of fun here to look at this statistically as well. You can see that it's really evenly split. I mean, if you're looking to find a husband or a wife, your odds are pretty much 50-50 here, right, at that point in time. All right, let's talk a little bit about money in the 1770s versus money in the 1860s, because there are some interesting comparisons to be made here. If you look at 1775, or the 1760s if you wanted to, there are no banks out here. So how is commerce happening? Commerce is happening by large the barter system. Commerce is happening with the exchange of specie or hard money, gold or silver. Legally, the only thing you're supposed to be carrying are British coins. But we know that there are a broad variety of coins from other nations flowing through here. Portuguese, Spanish, German, etc. But some colonies institute paper money as well. And they institute paper money or bills of credit in order to raise funds or in order to provide the populace with some form of currency. The danger with that paper currency, though, is typically it's not backed by anything or it's speculative. So in 1764, the British Crown creates a Currency Act. And I'm going to put this on the drumhead for you. Basically, what George III and his ministers say is, we're aware of the paper currency in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, other colonies. Knock it off, because all you're doing is driving massive inflation at this point in time. Those bills of credit become worth less every day. It's not fair to the people you owe money to. It's not fair to the overall economic policies for the colony. So we're reinforcing the fact that you are not to use the paper currency. You will only use British coin. And if any public official, they were really serious about this, any public officials who were found to be in violation of the act, if you were in a local population or you were a colonial governor and you permitted paper currencies to keep flowing after September 1st of 1764, you got fired, fined 20,000 pounds sterling, and you could never hold public office again. Yeah, very serious about it. There are currency acts in the Civil War as well. Gettysburg gets its first bank in 1814, all right? It will become a state bank in the 19th century. This top note that I've got there, I think that one is 1858 when they're a state bank. And this other note down here, you can see its first national bank of Gettysburg, all right? That's because in the Civil War, Lincoln will create currency acts. The issuance of what we know today as greenbacks, for those of you who are still carrying cash, and it's green on the back of it, that sort of thing. Why is Lincoln creating a currency act in the Civil War? You can do a callback right there to the 18th century. He's looking to create stabilized monetary policy. That's what he's doing, right? The most stable thing you've got is gold or silver. How practical is it to pay 200,000 guys in the army or better with bags of gold? Paymaster's not carrying that around. He wants to do this. He wants to have localized and state banks. He wants to get rid of those. He wants to convert them to national banks, and he wants to have their paper currency backed in value. In 1861 and 1862, the notes are backed by gold. After 1862, our notes are backed by nothing but good wishes and hopes. So the value of the dollar will then become very much relative to how successful federal forces are in the field over time. And a really good example of this, how many people are familiar with the fact that John McCausland burned Chambersburg to the ground in 1864, right? Okay, right? So Jubal Early's coming back as revenge for what Black Dave Hunter does down in the valley, destroying a bunch of homes down there. When Jubal Early sends John Tiger McCausland in 1864 to ransom that town, the demand note is really interesting. They want $100,000 in gold or $500,000 in cash. The reason they do that, Early's trying to figure out the exchange difference. That's my opinion. Early's saying, all right, $100,000 in gold, I know what that is. Taking a look at how well the Yankees are doing right now, $500,000 in greenbacks should split the difference if they can't give me the gold. But you see, in both of these time periods, national leaders are trying to do things that they think will stabilize the economy or things that are in the best interest of economic policy. The other reason that Lincoln wants to establish these currency acts is it will allow and authorize the federal government to sell bonds to pay for the war effort on top of it too. News in what will become Gettysburg and what will become Adams County in the 1770s, you don't have any newspapers at all. You're getting a newspaper, maybe the Pennsylvania Gazette that's published in Philadelphia, or you've got newspapers coming from Lancaster, York, or Baltimore that are coming in. By the 1860s, you've got 3 that are publishing on a regular basis. So you see that growth over time. What they don't have in the 1770s, and you've got out here brand spanking new in 1863 with your telegraph station down at the rail station, is the telegraph. Anybody know why I put that up there? Yes, that is the first recognized message that Samuel Morse sends to his assistant, Alfred Vail. And that is sent in 1844 from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, where Vail is waiting to receive it. But telegraphy by the 19th century is a huge step forward in communications. It's the text message of the day, right? It really is. Well, it's not as immediate as me texting somebody and oh, they've got it right now, but it cuts the communication time down from hours, days, or weeks to minutes because you work through relay stations. You could get a message from Washington, D.C. to St. Louis in under a half an hour. That's lightning speed at that point in time, provided the telegraph lines haven't been cut by somebody, of course, right? But remarkable move forward. And those just a couple of cool image. A battery wagon that's over there. This is taken during the war. And a field telegraph station, which is really cool with the Federal Army over there too. Taverns in the 18th century. Taverns are going to be essential to life everywhere, and they have them out here in what will eventually become Gettysburg and Adams County itself. There you go. So yeah, there's a picture of the globe courtesy of ACHS in 1863. That is existing very early on. That goes back to the 1760s. And so I have that here because that's your local tavern. And then, at least the one that we have an image of. And then this cool little interior, which is a British print, Settling the Affairs of the Nation from 1790, just to sort of give you a feel for the inside of an 18th century tavern. But in 1775, between Straben and Cumberland townships, there are the Black Horse Tavern, the Geddes Tavern, Joseph Hutchison's Tavern, Hugh McKean's Tavern, Susanna McNutt's Tavern. There are 7 taverns here in 1775. That number doubles to 14 by 1783. Yeah, and we know that there are taverns operating in the 1750s illegally because the McClellan family and the Geddes family both apply for tavern licenses in 1762. Before that, they'd been operating tippling houses. A tippling house is a tavern without a license. So which tells me that in the early 1760s, there was a tax crackdown on guys who were operating illegal taverns, and they were all applying for these licenses at that point in time. Now, why is it important that there are 7 taverns here in 1775? And probably more if you count the tippling houses. That tells you that people are moving through here. Taverns have a twofold purpose in the 18th century. As a community gathering space for socialization, for picking up the news of the day, for getting mail, for looking at newspapers, for talking to your neighbors, for having political debates. But 7 taverns out here means that that Great Wagon Road is getting enough traffic to sustain 7 taverns because your population can't at that point in time. So I think it's further evidence for this being a transit migratory path at that point in time. Some of the people that are meeting in those taverns are committees of correspondence. Committees, and this was a really cool Pennsylvania one here from 1776. The Lancaster County Committee of Correspondence, it's bilingual, which I think is really cool. The form is printed in English and German all at the same time. These committees of correspondence, you hear about them probably through things like Paul Revere and the Midnight Ride, right? That he's going to share that news. They exist, though, before the Revolution. Committees of correspondence aren't something that are developed as a reaction. They are something that exists before because they spread news within the colony itself or from colony to colony. Some famous names on the York County Committee of Correspondence in the 1760s and 1770s, and at least these last names should be familiar to many of you: George Brinkerhoff, Robert McPherson, William McClellan, Henry Slagle, Patrick Sherry, George Kerr, Abraham Banta, John Hamilton. all right? So there's a lot of names there that to this day or within this area have given their name to landscape features here. These are generally fairly well-respected people within communities who will participate in this activity. Pennsylvania in particular, committees of correspondence in the years leading up to the American Revolution are absolutely critical for relaying news within the colonies. Because as the Revolution is approaching, Pennsylvania is undergoing a political firestorm within the 1770s. Remember, we're founded as a proprietary colony under the Penn family. The Penn family are Quakers, and they have a stranglehold on Pennsylvania's government from founding in the early 1680s until revolution breaks out in 1775. There are plenty of Scotch-Irish, there are plenty of Germans who don't like the Penns, because the Penns don't always work towards their political and economic interests, and because culturally they see Quakers as vastly different than them. They have competing mind frames on what life is about. They have competing economic policies. So as the winds of revolution are in the air, you have a lot of those folks who are looking at an opportunity to topple the Penn family and to topple Penn government within the colony of Pennsylvania. It creates an environment where there is very much a lack of political stability, and that ladder gets really shaky really fast. So those are some of the topics that they're talking about in the 1760s and 1770s, the future of Pennsylvania government, along with the revolution itself. Of course, they're also going to talk about the political topics of the day that are motivating people to move towards rebellion. Things like the Sugar Act in 1764, which is going to disrupt the rum trade. 1765, the Stamp Act, which is eventually going to be repealed. 1767, 1768, the Townshend Acts, which are a series of indirect taxes on things like glass, lead, paint, all these products coming out of England. It's tariffs by another word. Tariffs being in the news is not new. Tariffs being in the news really angered colonists in the 1760s and 1770s because there were a bunch of smart people who saw through it and said, wait a minute, I'm still going to pay more for that because I just got to pay the other guy, not the tax man directly. And by the time you get to the coercive acts in 1774, they're talking about that a lot out here too, I'm sure. And the coercive acts, in short, do a couple of things. One, they abolish Massachusetts state government. Two, they shut the port of Boston. Three, as part of that, they enact the Quebec Act. All right. When colonists look at that outside of New England, those are a couple of moments where people go, wait a minute, we've crossed the line. What do you mean the Crown's going to abolish a due state government, the due colonial government? You can't do that. If they can do it to Massachusetts, they can do it to Pennsylvania, they can do it to Virginia. Right? The shutting of the port of Boston. I'll make this analogy for you. Imagine that today, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore becomes a place of much political and civil unrest. And the response of the federal government is to go into that town and say, all right, you want to be a troublemaker? We're shutting off the entire city right now. All your access to rail, highway, air transport, ports, shut off. Your duly elected officials, they're out of a job. We're going to install people who are going to get things done our way, and they're going to make sure that law and order is respected. You want to eat? We'll control the supplies coming in and out of the city. This is going to hurt your business? Tough. You want to squawk? We'll arrest you and we'll send you to a far-off place to be tried. Not by a jury of your peers, mind you, but by a military tribunal. That's what the shutting of the port of Boston did. That is really, really heavy-handed stuff. And the portion of this that is the Quebec Act, remember, just as you are students of recent history and students of your own lives, the people of the 18th century are students of recent history too. The colonist of 1775 looks back to 1760s. And they say, well, in 1763, we just won this war against France because we were going to make North America British for British economic success. It was going to be the keystone of the empire. We were going to be proud. Everybody's going to have a great time. 1763, nobody saw 1775 coming. But the Quebec Act in 1764 says to the Canadian French, because now remember, Canada is going to be English after 1763. In 1774, 11 years later, the British Crown says, You guys want to reinstate French civil law? Go right ahead. Do you want to practice Catholicism freely? Have at it. You want to move into the Ohio River Valley? Go on down south. And the colonists are standing there aghast at this point. They're thinking, we just lost a bunch of lives because the Ohio River Valley was supposed to be for us. What do you mean you're going to let them move in and settle there? What do you mean you're reinstating French civil law? These people are the enemy. Did you forget who we're fighting? You're treating us like the enemy and our old enemies like your friends. Those are the types of things that are angering colonists in the 1760s and 1770s. And as it's getting to a flashpoint, that Globe Tavern is going to play a central role in things. Because as a reaction to what's happening in Boston with the shutting of the port, Samuel Geddes will host a community meeting at that tavern. They are going to vote amongst the citizens of the area to send 250 pounds sterling in cash to the women and children of Boston to help feed them as a relief effort. And then he will have recruiting drives here. Captain Michael Doodle is a guy from York County, Pennsylvania. He's moving throughout this area trying to recruit troops for the Continental Army in 1775. That recruiting drive, that's happening at Geddes' Tavern. One of the recruits is going to be James. There's a local legend that's not documented that for this rifle company of Doodles, they had to line up at 200 or 250 yards away and shoot at marks. It would be really cool if we had documentation. We don't, but it's plausible, and it's happening in other places. This image that I'm showing you in the center here, a friend of mine shared this with me recently. That's from Connecticut, and an early war Connecticut militia company was taking target practice against this painted native over here. Lynn and Eggles's 1858 Pennsylvania and the War of the Revolution documents pretty well the number of folks who are in Doodle's initial unit, their names. Many of them are young. Many of them are without property. And they're going to leave this region and move immediately to Boston to support Washington's Continental Army. James Geddes among them. Background stuff there. Museum of the American Revolution did a recent exhibit called Faces of the Revolution, where people from the Revolutionary period who lived long enough to be photographed, and they have hundreds of them there. One person I wanted to call out, and that's an ACHS photo, is John Troxell. John Troxell was not born here. He was born, I believe, in Bethlehem. Yeah, he was born in Bethlehem. He moves here in 1786. He is a veteran of the Revolutionary War and a pretty prolific guy. He will live until 1833, so you can go downstairs and see that image as well. Troxell had, I wrote this down, 10 children, 71 grandchildren, 120 great-grandchildren, and 20 great-great-grandchildren before he dies in 1855. Yep. So, but this is, again, though, Faces of the Revolution. You know, it's not just a painting. Now you have these actual photographs. You can look into those eyes. You can see those people. You can make that connection with them. I want to talk a little bit about what James Geddes and some other folks are doing during the course of the war after they make the enlistment. We've got a great description here from a guy named Dr. James Thatcher. Thatcher's a guy from Barnstable, Massachusetts, serving as a surgeon in the Continental Army. So when these Pennsylvanians have moved up, these battalions of riflemen that recruited from around here, and our folks who will be coming from this area are all part of that. Barnstable is in camp, Thatcher's in camp watching these guys. And I know that's an 1823 date, okay, for Thatcher's Military Journal of the American Revolution. That's when it's published. These are all his wartime recollections and reminiscences that he's writing in his journal in real time. So he's not remembering all these 40, 50 years later. This is real time. He says, our Pennsylvanians are remarkably stout and hardy men, many of them exceeding 6 feet in height, dressed in white frocks or rifle shirts and round hats, remarkable for the accuracy of their aim, striking marks with great certainty at 200 yards distance. And he'll go on to say how their shot has frequently proved fatal to British officers who were exposing themselves. So, and there's a Troiani piece over there, but a pretty good representation of what I think Doodle's guys were wearing when they went up to Boston. Their enlistments are going to be short ones early on. The Continental Army only has typically 6-month or 1-year enlistments early until you get to late 1776. That's when they start enlisting guys for 3 years of the war. So for these guys who enlist in Doodle's company, they're going to go up to Boston. They're going to participate in activities there. They'll be part of Washington's efforts to drive the British out of that city, and the British Army and Navy evacuate Boston in March of 1776. They're still enlisted at that point in time. When their enlistments expire in June of that year, Geddes and a number of other folks from this area will re-enlist, and they will go into the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment. The 1st Pennsylvania Regiment is going to end up fighting at a really big battle, the Battle for New York. And in short, the Battle for New York in the summer of 1776 is when Britain decides to bring the hammer on the anvil. They're not playing around. They want to end this. They want to end it with one big fight. So, and quick side street just for British strategy here throughout the course of the 8-Year War. If you think about main British goals, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Providence, Savannah, St. Augustine, Mobile Bay, what do they all have in common? They're port cities, absolutely, because the British need ports to do two things. One is to absolutely strangulate a local civilian economy and to make people not want to support the continental effort. Two is a human need. The British Army, depending upon the campaign, ranges between 8 and 30,000 men. It's 8 to 30,000 men living and sleeping in the field for 6 to 8 months at a clip. The amount of supplies you need, you get hundreds of thousands of tons there. You need ports. That's your umbilical cord. That's your tether, all right? But New York is also the 2nd most populous city in the colonies/states at that point. So they're going to descend on New York with the largest fleet the world has seen since the Spanish Armada in 1588. It is going to be Britain's largest amphibious military operation until they assault the Dardanelles in the First World War. They're not kidding. James Geddes, several other folks from the area are up there. They're on Long Island. Long Island, Washington believed was going to be a feint operation that the British would pull, that their attack was going to come on Manhattan. New York is a series of islands, remember, okay? So Washington is keeping the bulk of his army on Manhattan, leaving a third of it on Long Island. Our local boys are on Long Island. They're guarding the Jamaica Pass. The British forces, in short, because we're going to be short on time soon, are going to completely fool the American commanders on Long Island, get around to the rear, and they're going to crush the American army in a giant pincer movement there. The first combat, heavy combat that these guys are going to see is there, when they're getting pushed on both ends by Germanic auxiliaries, by British troops, all of whom are veterans. And they're going to break because they have no choice. And they're going to run. And they're going to retreat. Through the Gowanus swamps, through the marshes, through the mill ponds. And this is nasty stuff. You know, the 18th century warfare is not a gentlemanly age by any means. They're going to smell burning flesh, burning hair, urine, feces from guys who are defecating themselves and soiling themselves because of pure and utter fear. They're going to hear the thud of musket balls going into bodies next to them. They're going to see sights they never could have imagined. And as they try to escape this, it's a mixed bag. Some of them are going to get taken prisoner. Some of them who run into Germanic auxiliaries who are having a bad day and who have been told, hey, by the way, those American riflemen, if you see them, kill them because they're not going to show you any mercy. The Germanic auxiliaries are going to believe that from their commanders. So there are plenty of these accounts of these guys trying to surrender, being bayoneted in the chest, bayoneted in the throat, pushed down their face into the marsh until they drown. That's the type of stuff they're seeing. I don't say that to be graphic and grotesque. I say that because that's the reality of it. And that's the best I can do to describe it to you. James Geddes, we believe, probably became a prisoner of war for a short period of time. He is listed as missing on the rolls for quite some period after the action at Long Island, along with a number of other local men. What his experience was as a prisoner of war, we don't really know. He is exchanged along with others by April of 1778 after his term of enlistment has expired. For the prisoners up there in the New York campaign, it also could have gone one of two ways. Depending on what units took them and where they were being stationed, some of the American POWs are allowed a bit of liberty and they're walking around Gravesend and they're getting decent supplies. For the guys who are quartered in the sugar houses in New York, who are stationed there, they're being crammed into conditions that never should be in. If you think of accounts of places like Belle Isle or Libby, during the American Civil War. You can make a lot of correlations to what's going on there. On top of it, the guy running prisons for the British, William Cunningham, was a noted sadist. And he took great pleasure in just beating people for no good reason. We have no record to say exactly what happened. I wish that we did. So the best that I can do for you is to tell you there are a couple of things that could have happened, a couple of ways that that could have gone. We can tell you that later on in the war, Geddes will re-enlist with a local dragoon troop in 1781, and he's doing that because the Yorktown campaign is coming. He'll be a cornet. He'll be the grade of, it's roughly equivalent to a second lieutenant by that point in time. He won't see action, but he's being held in readiness at that point. So he serves multiple hitches of service in multiple units. Where we do get a lot of good information about our veterans from the American Revolution and the things that they saw and did, not as many surviving letters or diaries as you have in the American Civil War, to be certain, but pension records can be very instructive. James Monroe, himself a veteran of the American Revolution, will establish the first Pension Act in 1818. I included this painting over here by John Lewis Kimmel. I love this painting from 1811, Pepper Pot, a scene in the Philadelphia market, because you can see very clearly over there in the right-hand corner, there's the impoverished veteran in 1811 eating his pepper pot soup in the street. He's got his ratty old Continental coat on. Monroe, as a veteran, wants to try to help these guys out. The Pension Acts, though, it's a slow thing. It's gradual. If you think about it, 1818, it's 38 years. It's a long time after the wars ended at that point in time, over 30 years. And initially in the Pension Act of 1818, it only included people who served in Continental forces, and it had to be over a year, and you had to be in an impoverished state. We don't have a pension application from James Geddes. Right? Probably was not impoverished. In 1832, they start to expand it and make it more inclusive. But at that point in time, many of the veterans have died away, and it is very difficult for them to prove service. They have to do a lot of things in order to get money from the federal government. But the existing pension records have great information. You can see these downstairs. I took pictures of them and put them up here on the screen. But the pension application for a family member of Thomas Reed and Wilhelmus Hoodlin are downstairs on display here. These guys who are from your area, not just serving in Long Island, but those who were released after being captured and re-enlisted, or men who were not captured up at Long Island, if they re-enlist in what becomes the 1st Continental Regiment, they will go on to serve at places like Trenton, Princeton, Paoli, Germantown, Valley Forge. Those are not small skirmishes. Those are significant actions in the course of the American Revolution. Your hometown boys are there. They're doing those things. One of the cool things about the Reed pension application that I found interesting, and this was a guy writing on behalf of a family member for him, recalling going to camp and seeing Thomas Reed there. And that's how he's going to prove it. Like, yes, I went to see another family member. He says he brought a house load of cheese with him. Whatever a house load is, I have not found in any 18th century dictionary. It's a lot of cheese, you know? But, you've got this young kid who crossed the Susquehanna with a house load of cheese and made it out to Valley Forge to go see his relatives. So take a peek at those when you go downstairs. The Dobbin House, of course, your 18th century structure that's here dating back to 1776. Reverend Alexander Dobbin, and I'm going to speed this up so we can get through to the end quickly. He is doing things to support the war effort as well. It's not just guys in the field. Dobbin is providing horses to the Continental Army. He's working with one of the McPhersons, who is an assistant commissary out here, and McPherson is providing at least 316 barrels of flour and an undisclosed amount of whiskey to the Continental Army. And not everybody is for the cause. Not everybody out here is going to side with the Continentals. And that's important to understand too. You have bands of Tories like the Bermudian Creek Tories. People are going to be loyal to the crown. Some of them are conscientious objectors. Pennsylvania, and remember we talked about the Penns and that shift in government? Well, when Pennsylvania's new state government takes over in 1776, they throw the Penns out. They say, all right, we've got power. Let's do it. And then they make everybody's got to sign a loyalty oath to the Continental cause, which turns off a lot of people. They also say if you don't want to serve in our state forces and our militia, you're going to have to pay a fine of 3 pounds and 6 shillings. You don't want to take the loyalty oath? That's fine. You don't have to take it. You can pay your fine, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to disarm you. You can't buy or sell real estate. You can't serve on a jury. You can't sue anybody. And by the way, we're going to be watching you because you're a troublemaker. Does that sound like liberty? No, and there's a lot of people who said, wait a minute, you're more tyrannical than the king. So you had objectors based on that. Samuel Geddes is highly involved with the collection of fines for people who don't conform. A lot of that's taking place at the Geddes Taverns. There's records of him in 1777 and later allowing fines to be collected there. So not everybody is going to want to side with the Continental cause over here. All right, one last thing, and then that'll keep me within 5 minutes of my closing time because I want to make sure I'm conscientious of that. This photo by Tipton from about 1912. The woman that I want you to kind of focus on is, I hope I do the pointer without... I'm going to screw it up if I try to do it. So not this guy in the hat, but the woman right next to him, Emma Yount Stumpf. She is born Emma Orlana Yount on April 25th, 1856. Her parents, Israel and Mary, owned the Washington House Hotel in Gettysburg that was located on the southwest corner of Railroad and Carlisle Streets. So in 1856, she's a young girl at the time of the battle, right? She writes this letter in 1943. To her son, who is asking her to recollect things that have happened during the course of the battle. This is just an excerpt. There's another part of this letter where she talks about giving a bouquet of flowers, or at least trying to throw them at Lincoln on the train as he's departing from the Gettysburg Address. But she goes into detail about this handkerchief she is given by a Union soldier on the night of June 30th. And that's downstairs too if you haven't seen it. The original is down there. They were donated to ACHS, I think in 1995 by the family. And the letter, I think, is in the collection here too. But you have this wonderful recollection of a girl who's maybe 7 years old at that point in time, talking about it, what's happening, but then look at the iconography of what the Union soldier is carrying. Who's on that? It's George Washington. There's another direct correlation. Union forever, Washington, direct correlation to the revolution itself. And I'll sort of close off here. With Catton and Lincoln. We started with some verbal archaeology. We looked at the inaugural addresses, the Gettysburg Address, which I'm not going to read to you because it's read 1,000 times over to the point where it almost becomes like, oh my goodness, somebody's reading this again. I can't believe it. And it almost cheapens the value of it. But what I want you to think about with that speech here is Charles Sumner calls this the most momentous act of Lincoln's presidency. He says that on July 1st of 1865 after Lincoln is already dead. Sumner goes so far as to say that the speech was more important than the battle itself. I think that's probably highly debatable. But what I want you to pull away from this is, where does Lincoln start? 77 years ago. Direct callback to the Revolutionary period. That's what he's doing. That's where he's bringing us. He said, all of this is important because of then. Because of 1776. And when Lincoln is doing at the end it's a call and a commendation to preserve not just this system of government here in the United States, but around the world. He has expanded the focus. Lincoln has made, as a result of that speech, the war be about not just the preservation of freedom and what freedom should mean here in this country, but he's telling us that the state of freedom within the entire world hinges upon the outcome of that conflict. That's what he's doing with that speech on the drumhead. And I took Catton up here to close because I love a quote from him. He says the following: "We are people to whom the past is forever speaking. We listen to it because we cannot help ourselves. For out of that dark nowhere that is the time before we were born, men who were flesh of our flesh and bone of our bone went through fire and storm to break a path to the future. We are part of that future. They are a part of the past that brought it. What they did, the lives they lived, the sacrifices they made, the stories they told, the songs they sang, and finally the deaths they died, make up a part of our own experience. We cannot cut ourselves off from it. It is as real to us as something that happened last week." And my hope is that for all of you, the study of history will always be as something as real that happened last week. Certainly, I think you can see that for the folks of the Civil War time period, the Revolution, to them, history was something as real that happened last week. And I will close with the Uruguayan historian Eduardo Galeano, who says, history never really says goodbye. History says, see you later, and I hope I see you later too.